Hi students, today we will learn about physiological anatomy, functions and lesions of the thalamus. Coming to the physiological anatomy of the thalamus is situated at the core of the diencephalon, deep to the cerebral cortices, and it acts as the central hub. The thalamus relays and integrates motor and sensory impulses between the higher centers of the brain and the peripheries. The thalamus is made up of two symmetrical structures formed from the diencephalon. Each half of the thalamus is elongated along the antero-posterior axis, giving it to an ovoid appearance. It is narrowest at the end and widest at the posterior part. The thalami are made up of grey matter that is partitioned by a Y-shaped white matter structure known as the internal medullary lamina. As a result of the location of the internal medullary lamina, each thalamus is divided into three main parts: anterior, medial and lateral. The anterior part lies between the short limbs of the internal medullary lamina, while the medial and lateral parts lie on the respective side of the main stem of the internal medullary lamina. The left thalamus communicates with the right thalamus by way of the interthalamic adhesions. You can see here this is anterior, this is medial and this is lateral thalamus. These are two thalami, green structures. This is Y-shaped internal medullary lamina. Coming to the embryological development of the thalamus. This is in the mouse brain. It is studied. It is at the 10.5 days of the embryological development of the brain. This is at 12.5 days and this is at 13.5 days and these are at 18.5 days. So coming to the development of the thalamus and its connection to the cortex in the mouse brain, a sagittal view of the brain around 10.5 embryological development days showing the pretectal, thalamic and prethalamic analogen. So at 10.5 days, the analogen will be formed. By 12.5 days, the telencephalic vesicles expand over the diencephalon and node the prethalamus, which is lying to anterior thalamus. So the prethalamus is formed anterior to the thalamus and these two structures are separated by ZLI, that is zona limitans intrathalamica. So at 10.5 days, first analogen of the pretectal, thalamic and prethalamic analogens will be formed. At 12.5 days, prethalamus will be formed and it is separated from the thalamus by zona limitans intrathalamica. At 13.5 days, a coronal section of the forebrain cut is shown by the red line in the B. You have noticed that? Okay. So a red line is drawn which is cutting the forebrain. Okay. The thalamocortical axons grow from the thalamus through the prethalamus and into the telencephalon where they form the internal capsule. So in that way the thalamus will project its projections from the thalamus to the prethalamus and to the telencephalon through the internal capsule. Next coming to D. That is three coronal sections through the brain is shown at a embryological period of 18.5 days from anterior on the left to the posterior on the right. The axons from different thalamic nuclei project in the topographic order to innervate their specific cortical regions. You see here, the dorsolateral geniculate nucleus innervates occipital, that is visual cortex, which is shown in purple. Then the ventrobasal nuclei innervate the parietal, that is somatosensory cortex, which is shown in the green line. Then Ventrolateral nuclei. Innervate frontal, that is motor cortex, which is shown in the orange line. The thalamocortical axons cross the diencephalic-telencephalic boundary and the pallial-subpalliar boundary. Next, coming to E diagram. This is the horizontal section of the left side of the forebrain taken in the plane, which is shown by red line in D. Okay. So, in the D, you have drawn a red line. No? So, up to that, they have cut it and they have shown separately and clearly in the E diagram. Then coming to the blood supply to the thalamus. Here you can see the thalamus derives its blood supply from a number of arteries. So coming to basilar communicating artery, posterior cerebral artery and the posterior communicating artery are the major blood supply to the thalamus. See here basilar artery, okay, it is basilar artery and it is going like this, okay. So basilar artery, this is posterior cerebral artery and posterior communicating artery, okay. So this is basilar artery, posterior cerebral artery and posterior communicating artery. So these are the three main arteries which supply the thalamus. Then coming to anatomical classification of the thalamic nuclei. You can divide these thalamic nuclei into three groups based on the anatomical location. That is anterior group, lateral group and medial group. Okay, so anterior group of nuclei. This is medial group of nuclei. This is lateral group of nuclei. So anteriorly you have anterior nucleus. Laterally you have many nuclei. In that also they are divided into ventral group of nuclei and dorsal group of nuclei. Okay, ventral and dorsal. Coming to ventral group of nuclei, it will include ventral anterior nucleus, ventrolateral nucleus, ventro-posterior nucleus, which is further divided into ventro-posteromedial and ventro-posterolateral nucleus. Then geniculate bodies, medial and lateral geniculate bodies. Then in the dorsal group of nuclei, you have lateral dorsal nucleus, then lateral posterior nucleus and pulvinar nucleus. So, we finished the lateral group of nuclei, ventral side, dorsal side. Okay. Then, coming to, so if you see, in the anterior group of nuclei, you have anterior nuclei, that is one. In the lateral group, you have ventral and dorsal. In the ventral, you have ventral anterior 1. This is ventrolateral 2. Then ventro-posterior. This is medial and lateral 3 and 4. Okay. Then geniculate bodies 5 and 6. So 6 names of the nuclei you have to write in the ventral group of nuclei. Then coming to dorsal group, you should write these three names. Lateral dorsal, lateral posterior and pulvinar. So this is 1, this is 6 and these are 9. These are 3. So totally 10 nuclei we have covered up to this. Then coming to medial group of nuclei. Those are dorsomedial nuclei. Okay. Then centromedian nuclei and other intralaminar nuclei. Okay. This is the internal medullary lamina that is also containing nucleus and midline nuclei. So this is midline. So in the medial group you have dorsomedial, this is 1. This is midline nuclei, this is 2. Then centromedian nuclei, this is 3. And some intralaminar nuclei, 4. Okay. So you have to write 4 names in the medial group of nuclei. Okay, this is 1, 6, 3 and 4. Then coming to the functional classification of the thalamic nuclei. So how functionally they are classified? We have specific projection nuclei and a non-specific projection nuclei. So first coming to non-specific projection nuclei. So these are the nuclei. These will receive impulses diffusely from the RAS system, that is reticular activating system, and they will project diffusely to the whole of the neocortex. Okay, so their incoming, that is efferents and afferents, are diffuse. So they are non-specific projection nuclei. They are midline nuclei and centromedian nuclei. Okay, so they are two, midline nuclei and centromedian nuclei. They are non-specific projection nuclei. Then coming to specific projection nuclei. So specifically they will project to a particular area. They are divided into 4 groups. They are specific sensory relay nuclei, motor control nuclei, visceral efferent control nuclei, integrative and perceptual function control nuclei. So you see here the specific projection nuclei, specific sensory relay nuclei. So these are medial geniculate bodies, lateral geniculate bodies, posteroventral group of nuclei. Okay, that is posteroventral, posteromedial and posterolateral. Then motor control nuclei. These include ventrolateral group of nuclei, ventrolateral and ventroanterior, that is controlling the motor function. So these are medial geniculate, lateral geniculate, VPM and VPL are concerned with the sensory function, sensory relay. Ventrolateral and ventroanterior is controlling the motor function. Then coming to visceral efferent. These are anterior group of nuclei, dorsomedial nucleus. Okay, so these two will control visceral efferent function, that is anterior dorsomedial nucleus. Then coming to integrative and perceptual function control. Those are the remaining one. Pulvinar nucleus, lateral posterior and dorsolateral nucleus. Lateral dorsal or dorsolateral nucleus and lateral posterior nucleus. These three. Lateral dorsal, lateral posterior, pulvinar. These will control the perceptual and integrative function. So these four, that is medial geniculate, lateral geniculate, ventroposteromedial, ventroposterolateral, will they are concerned with sensory function. Ventroanterior and ventrolateral, they are concerned with motor function. Anterior nucleus and dorsomedial nucleus is concerned with the visceral efferents, and pulvinar, lateral posterior, lateral dorsal, they are concerned with the integrative and perceptual function. Okay, then the centromedian and midline, they are non-specific projection nuclei. Then coming to the connections of the thalamus. Connections of non-specific projection nuclei. The non-specific projection nuclei include, you already know, the midline nuclei, centromedian and other intralaminar nuclei. You already know what are those? The midline nucleus, centromedian nucleus and other intralaminar nuclei. They are non-specific projection nuclei. So where are the afferents are coming from? Afferents to these nuclei come from reticular activating system, basal ganglia and other thalamic nuclei. The efferents will go from these nuclei to the striatum and the entire neocortex. Then coming to the connections of the specific projection nuclei. Okay. So here first comes medial geniculate bodies. This is the medial geniculate body. So the afferents will come from cochlear nerve, lateral lemniscus, and also from the inferior colliculi. Okay. So the afferents will come from lateral lemniscus. Okay. Lateral lemniscus. And from the cochlear nerve. So through the lateral lemniscus. Okay. Efferents will project onto the auditory area of the cerebral cortex. That is area number 41, 42. That is Brodmann's areas. The applied aspect here is destruction of a small part of the medial geniculate body produces deafness of a particular band of sound frequency. So there will be deafness for a particular band of sound frequency. So here you can see these are the inferior colliculi. These are the medial geniculate bodies. Okay, these are the cochlear nerves. Okay, which are relaying in the cochlear nucleus. From there, they are forming lateral lemniscus. Okay, so their lateral lemniscus will come to the medial geniculate body. So here, conscious auditory sensations will be processing. Then the inferior colliculus is for unconscious auditory reflexes. So from the cochlear nucleus, the afferents will go to medial geniculate body and inferior colliculus. And then inferior colliculus projects onto the medial geniculate body also. Okay. So the medial geniculate body is for conscious auditory sensations. The inferior colliculus is for unconscious auditory reflexes. Then this medial geniculate body will project onto the auditory cortex area number 41 and 42. Then coming to the lateral geniculate bodies. The afferents will come from the optic tracts from both eyes. So here you should notice that the temporal fibers of the same side and nasal fibers of the opposite side will be present in one optic tract. Okay. They also receive projections from the superior colliculi. So here you can notice that superior colliculus. Here you have lateral geniculate body. So from the optic nerve, after optic chiasma, the optic tract will be formed. So they will stimulate the lateral geniculate body. And this is the superior colliculus. Actually, so the superior colliculus is also sending its information to the lateral geniculate body. Here, the optic radiations will be emerging and they will project topographically on the visual cortex of the occipital lobe. Area number 17, 18 and 19. Then coming to ventroposterior nucleus. It has two divisions, that is VPL and VPM. Ventroposterolateral and ventroposteromedial. The medial lemniscus, which is carrying afferent fibers from the gracile nucleus and cuneate nucleus, and spinothalamic afferents. These all three will be terminating in the ventroposterolateral nucleus. Thus, this VPL receives somatosensory impulses such as touch, pressure, pain, proprioceptive, temperature and kinesthetic sensations from the trunk and limbs, that is whole body except the face. Then coming to the trigeminal lemniscus. It will carry afferents from face and taste fibers. These will terminate in the VPM. Thus, the VPM receives somatosensory impulses from the face along with the sensation of the taste. So, two lemnisci are important, medial lemniscus and a trigeminal lemniscus. The efferents will go to sensory cortex areas 3, 1, 2, which are present in the post-central gyrus, via the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Okay. So this ventro-posterior nucleus, these two nuclei are main sensory nuclei. So here you can see these are dorsal columns which is going to thalamus, that is VPL nucleus. Okay, that is dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway. This is spinothalamic tract. Okay, it is also going to VPL nucleus. Here you can see trigeminal lemniscus which is going to VPM nucleus. Then coming to the motor nuclei. So up to here we completed the sensory nuclei. Now we came to motor nuclei. So in that the first one is ventrolateral nucleus. Ventrolateral nucleus. The afferents will come from cerebellar impulses from the dentate nucleus via the dendrothalamic fibers. It also receives fibers from the globus pallidus via thalamic fasciculus. So afferents will come from two, that is from the cerebellum dendrothalamic fibers and from the basal ganglia, that is globus pallidus via thalamic fasciculus. Okay, so you can see here this is the thalamus. Okay, from the cerebellum dendrothalamic fibers and from the globus pallidus. Okay, leave it. Efferents from ventrolateral nucleus project onto the primary motor cortex and premotor cortex. Those are areas number 4 and 6, Brodmann areas, via the posterior limb of the internal capsule. Okay. These relay proprioceptive information and voluntary motor functions. Okay, these are important for proprioception and voluntary motor functions. So here you can see globus pallidus. So in the diagram we are not having globus pallidus. No, here we have globus pallidus, internus, externus. This is putamen. Okay, so this is substantia nigra. This is subthalamic nucleus. This is thalamus. All these things cerebral cortex. So this thalamus will receive inputs from the globus pallidus. So directly via globus pallidus internus. Okay, or the putamen will send its impulses to directly to globus pallidus internus and to the thalamus, or from the putamen to the globus pallidus externus. Okay, then to globus pallidus, then to substantia nigra and to subthalamic nucleus to the globus pallidus internus and thalamus, or through substantia nigra also. Okay, so the ultimate pathway is from globus pallidus internus to the thalamus. Then the thalamus will send its radiation. That is 4 radiations: superior thalamic radiation, inferior thalamic radiation, anterior thalamic radiation, and posterior thalamic radiation. Okay, this is anterior, superior, posterior thalamic radiations. Then coming to the ventro-anterior nucleus. The afferents to the ventro-anterior nucleus is involved in the programming of movements which are controlled by the basal ganglia. Its afferents comes from globus pallidus internus, cerebellum, and substantia nigra pars reticulata. So substantia nigra has two parts, pars reticulata and some other part. Here we are concerned with pars reticulata. Okay, the efferents from ventro-anterior nucleus will go to premotor cortex, that is area number 6. So ventro-anterior nucleus, where is it? Ventro-anterior nucleus is receiving impulses from the basal ganglia, that is globus pallidus internus. Okay, globus pallidus internus, Okay, then cerebellum. Okay, from the cerebellum, and from the substantia nigra pars reticulata. Here also it is not showing. Substantia nigra pars reticulata will also project onto VA. The reference will go to area number 6. Then coming to visceral efferent control nuclei. Visceral efferent control nuclei. So in that the first one is anterior nucleus. Okay, anterior thalamic nucleus. This is. So the afferents belongs to the Pepys circuit of the limbic system, and it is concerned with recent memory and emotions. So from the limbic system it has connections via the Pepys circuit. It receives afferents from hippocampus directly via fornix and relayed through mammillary body through mammillothalamic tract. Okay, so it receives its afferents from the hippocampus directly via the fornix. This is red color one is fornix. Okay, from the hippocampus. This is hippocampal formation. From here the fornix is formed and it is giving its fibers to anterior thalamic nucleus. Okay, anterior thalamus. Anterior thalamic nucleus. And relayed through mammillary body, and it forms and it also receives from the mammillary body. These are the mammillary bodies. Okay, these are the mammillary bodies. Mammillothalamic tract. Mammillothalamic tract. Okay, so it receives its inputs from the limbic system, that is from the hippocampus and from the mammillary body. The efferents will go to cingulate gyrus, that is area number 24 of the cerebral cortex. Okay, the efferents will go to cingulate gyrus. So in future videos will come the Pepys circuit in detail. Now coming to the fornix. What is fornix? Fornix is a C-shaped bundle of white matter that is found in the mesial aspect of the cerebral hemispheres below the corpus callosum. So this fornix is a C-shaped bundle of the white matter, and it is on the medial aspect of the cerebral hemispheres, and it lies below the corpus callosum. Okay. The fornix is an important part of the limbic system, and it represents the largest single pathway of the hippocampus, connecting the hippocampus to its various subcortical structures. So what is the importance of the fornix? It connects the hippocampus to various subcortical structures. The fornix originates from the hippocampus in the mesial temporal lobe and stretches longitudinally to the diencephalon and basal forebrain, forming an arch over the thalamus. So the fornix starts from the hippocampus and it forms an arch over the thalamus. And being a part of the limbic system, the fornix is associated with the process of cognition, memory consolidations, and emotions. Coming to parts of the fornix, we have alveus, fimbria, crura, body, and columns of the fornix. Its connections are hippocampus to the mammillary bodies of the hypothalamus, mammillary bodies to the anterior nuclei of the thalamus, hippocampus to the septal nuclei and nucleus accumbens. So mainly it connects the hippocampus to various subcortical structures. Functions. It is involved in the cognition, memory, and emotions. So here you can see this is hippocampus. Here the fornix is started and it forms an arch over the thalamus. Okay. This is mammillary body of the hypothalamus. Okay. Then this is mammillothalamic tract, that is going to the anterior nuclei. We have already discussed. So this is the crest. Okay. That is crura. This is body. Okay. And this is the fornix of the thalamus. So of the fornix. So we have shown some parts, crura, body and arm of the fornix. Okay, and this is going to the mammillary body of the hypothalamus, which is a subcortical structure. Here we have see the cingulate gyrus. So this is the cingulate gyrus. What are these functions? It connects sensory input to the emotions and it forms emotional responses to the pain and it regulates aggressive behavior and it is helpful for the communication, maternal bonding, language expression and decision making. Then coming to dorsomedial nucleus, that is the second visceral efferent nucleus. Dorsomedial nucleus has its reciprocal connections with the prefrontal cortex and hypothalamus. Its point-to-point connections with the prefrontal cortex imply important functions in thinking, memory, judgment and emotional behavior. So it is important for all these activities. Then coming to the last category, integrative and perceptual function control nuclei. In that we have pulvinar nucleus. Okay, this is the pulvinar nucleus. The afferents to the pulvinar nucleus is concerned with the integration of the visual, auditory and other sensations. It receives afferents from the superior and inferior colliculi. So this receives impulses from the superior colliculus and inferior colliculus also. Okay. So the efferents will go to the parietal lobe, okay, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, superior temporal lobe, okay. Okay, so they are involved in the auditory and visual association areas. So from the pulvinar nucleus, the efferents will go to association areas of the auditory area and visual area. So here you can see the same diagram, and here this is the pulvinar nucleus which is receiving its connections with the medial geniculate body. Okay, this is the pulvinar nucleus. Okay. This is superior colliculus. This is medial geniculate body. This is inferior colliculus. Okay. This is lateral lemniscus. Okay. So it will receive from the both auditory sensations and visual sensations through colliculi, inferior colliculus and superior colliculus. Here you can see the pulvinar nucleus is again divided into lateral pulvinar and medial pulvinar. The lateral pulvinar dorsal medial. So in the lateral also we have lateral pulvinar dorsomedial nucleus and lateral pulvinar ventrolateral nucleus. Okay, these are the lateral pulvinar nuclei. This is the medial pulvinar nucleus. Okay. And this is the inferior pulvinar nucleus which contains 4 divisions. That is posterior nucleus of the inferior pulvinar, medial nucleus of the inferior pulvinar, central medial nucleus of the inferior pulvinar, central nucleus of the inferior pulvinar. So central lateral nucleus. This is centromedial nucleus of the inferior pulvinar. And this is the medial, this is posterior nucleus. Okay. Then coming to posterolateral nucleus and dorsolateral nucleus. Lateral posterior or posterolateral nucleus. The afferents will be from the superior colliculus. The efferents will go to cerebral cortex of the superior parietal lobe. They also reach the cingulate and parahippocampal area. The dorsolateral nucleus receives afferents from the superior colliculus and it will project to cingulate gyrus, parahippocampal gyrus and parts of the hippocampal formation. And some fibers reach the parietal cortex. So, these both lateral posterior and dorsolateral. Okay, these will receive afferents from the superior colliculus. Okay, and they will project onto the parietal lobe and to the limbic system. So here you can see the overall view. What are the afferents and what are the efferents to the thalamic nuclei. Okay. So this is the anterior one from the mammillary bodies. This is dorsomedial from the prefrontal cortex and hypothalamic nuclei. And VA from substantia nigra and globus pallidus. And VL from globus pallidus and cerebellum. VPL and VPM from lemnisci. Pulvinar from superior and inferior colliculi. Lateral geniculate body from optic tract. Medial geniculate body from lateral lemniscus. These are the efferents. From the anterior nucleus, it will go to cingulate cortex. From ventro-anterior, it will go to premotor cortex, area number 6. From the motor cortex, it will go to area number 4 and 6. And VPL and VPM will go to area number 3, 1, 2 and 4. From pulvinar, it will go to occipital, parietal occipital and superior temporal cortex. And LGB will go to visual cortex, area number 17. And MGB will go to auditory cortex, areas 41 and 42. So these are the afferents and efferents of the thalamic nuclei. Then coming to the functions of the thalamus. Okay. So it is a sensory relay center. Okay. You have already seen it. Sensory relay center. And it is a center for integration of sensory impulses. So the sensory sensations will be relaying and they will be integrated at the level of the thalamus. And it is a crude center for perception of the sensations. Okay, and it acts as a crude center for the perception of the sensations. Then coming to the motor functions. Center for the integration of the motor functions. And it plays a role in arousal and alertness reaction. And this plays a role in the emotional aspect of the behavior because it's connected to the limbic cortex. Then it plays a role in the language, okay, because it is connected to the auditory and visual areas. And it plays a role in the synchronization of the EEG because from the thalamus the projections will go to many parts of the cerebral cortex and they will excite the cerebral cortex. Then it plays a role in integration of visceral and somatic function. Okay, visceral and somatic functions. And it is a center for sexual sensations and it is a center for reflex activity. Then coming to the lesions of the thalamus. Thalamic syndrome. The thalamic syndrome is a disturbance of emotional responses to sensory experience. So there will be disturbance at the level of emotions to the sensory experience. What is the cause? The thalamic syndrome is caused by damage to the posteroventral and posterolateral nuclei as a result of thrombotic blockage of thalamo-geniculate branch of posterior cerebral artery. So this posterior cerebral artery gives a branch to this thalamus, that is thalamo-geniculate branch. So because of the thrombotic blockage of this branch, mainly these two nuclei get affected, that is posteroventral and posterolateral nuclei. So because of this, the emotional response is disturbed. It is also known as central thalamic post-stroke syndrome Degenerate-Rousey syndrome, thalamic pain syndrome. Okay. So it is also known by these three names. What are those? Thalamic, central thalamic post-stroke syndrome, Degenerate-Rousey syndrome, thalamic pain syndrome. What are the signs and symptoms? So there will be sensory and motor signs and symptoms. So coming to sensory, there will be contralateral hemianesthesia. Contralateral hemianesthesia and astereognosis. Thalamic phantom limb will be present. Okay, thalamic phantom limb. Actually, limb won't be present, but the person feels like he had limb. And thalamic overreaction. So there will be emotionally disturbance. Amylognosis and contralateral homonimbus hemianopia will be present. Okay. Contralaterally hemianesthesia, homonymous and hemianopia, astereognosis, amylognosis, thalamic phantom limb, thalamic overreaction. These 6 sensory symptoms will be present. Then coming to motor symptoms, there will be ataxia. Okay. And involuntary movements such as chorea, thetosis, intention tremors will be there. And there will be thalamic hand or athetoid hand. So you can see this thalamic hand here. It is like this. Okay. At the wrist it is flexed. Okay. And these fingers are positioned like this. So there will be flexion at the wrist joint. Okay. And flexion of the hand at the knuckles. Okay. And extension of the interphalangeal joints. Then coming to Korsakoff syndrome. So in the lesions of the thalamus, you have thalamic syndrome and Korsakoff syndrome. So Korsakoff syndrome, it refers to lesion in the mediodorsal nucleus of the thalamus. So here the lesion is present in the dorsomedial or mediodorsal nucleus of the thalamus. So it is characterized by difficulty in remembering the new information. So the person cannot remember any new information. So these are the lesions of the thalamus. So we have learned lesions of the thalamus, functions of the thalamus. Okay. And we have learned all groups of the thalamic nuclei. Okay, based on its function and location. And we have seen the connections of the thalamus and blood supply to the thalamus and its embryological development and physiological anatomy of the thalamus. The next video is about physiological anatomy, functions and lesions of the hypothalamus.